Greetings, spacers. Welcome back to another episode of the Space Revolution. My name is Rick Tumlinson. You're tuned into iRock Space Radio right now. We're part of the iHeartRadio network. Now, today, whenever you're on this globe, you happen to be hearing this, we're going to dive into a lascivious, you can pause, go look that one up, topic, the idea of sex in space. But actually, we're going to be thinking about reproduction in space and what happens in terms of reproduction, birth, the growth of an embryo, baby, things like that, which interestingly is something that has not had a lot of work done on it. Our guest today is Dr. Alexander Layendecker. He is a graduate of the Air Force Academy. I know you're thinking that's unlikely for that topic. Where did that come from? And an Air Force Space Operations Officer. He has been done a tour in Afghanistan, worked on space tactics, launch, range activities. He's also part of an emergency helicopter rescue squad. And picked up a master's in public health at the Institute for this Advanced Study of Human Sexuality. He's got a PhD in human sexuality, and which has really got to be cool to roll that out in bars, Alexander. I'm just kidding. We'll come back to that. But we are talking about something very serious here, and to really dive into it, Alex founded the Astrosexological Research Institute, which is based in Cape Canaveral. It's a not-for-profit, ASRI, or ASRI, as we'll refer to it in the rest of the call. He's also working with an organization called Spaceborne. And without going too much longer into the bio, which continues, greetings, Alex. How you doing?
Doing great, Rick. Good to be with you. Greetings from sunny Florida.
Yeah. Thank God we're all out of that summer we had. But and we don't know when people are going to listen to this. So Alex, how to enter this topic, so to speak. I mean, how do we go into this? So, look, as you know, I wrote the preface to the original book, Sex in Space, that was published many years ago and was apparently so scandalous that they would not allow it to be on the shelves at the JPL NASA Visitor Center, and they pulled it down. But here we are. We're about, let's say, 3 to 5 years from the point when private space travelers, private astronauts, other kinds of visitors are going to be able to go up and live for extended periods. And by that, I mean, this is relative to, going up and down, sort of like with Blue Origin or Virgin Galactic, but going up there and, staying for a week or 2 weeks or something in a space facility. And you and I know we're going to come back to this, but, we divide these people up into different kinds. You'll have people who live there, people who are visiting, things like that. So it's coming down the pike. I guess the first thing I want to ask you is, how did this become a topic of interest for you, given the fact that, you're a full-blown military dude and that kind of activity? When did this start to wake up as an idea for you?
So I would say as an idea, it probably started to come into feasibility as a possibility for research when I was around the time of completing my master's. So as you mentioned, I did an MPH in human sexuality at the Institute when it was still in operation in San Francisco. The original reason I'd gotten into sex research was more geared toward sort of, a military science objective, was looking at combining sexual sciences with military sciences, forensic sciences, for sort of overall more military. could call it military oriented goals. Uh, in the time period that all this was happening, I actually got picked up to go to undergraduate pilot training, and had been struggling to gather data and complete, even the outline of a PhD in the other area I'd been studying, and realized that I had less than a year before I would be heading off to pilot training for the Air Force. So facing a severe time crunch, I discussed with members of my PhD board, and they recommended that I switch topics because I was sort of going down this endless rabbit hole in the other subject area. My operational background was in space, and I'd already toyed for a long time with the idea of doing a PhD, maybe doing a second PhD, on sex and space as an area of interest. Managed to complete my dissertation about a month before I was sent off to pilot training in early 2016, and that was after a very intense period of doing nothing but PhD research, writing long periods of writing and research every day, conducting interviews, etc. So there was a decent amount of literature to go through, but still concise enough, because as you mentioned, there hasn't been a ton of research in this area. It was still concise enough for me to get a good comprehensive view and develop a thesis which I could work off of.
So your thesis may have been one of the very first ever written on the topic. I mean, conceivably.
So in the field of sexology itself, which is the study of human sexuality, general human sexuality, just the sexual sciences, collective sexual sciences. It was the second. So the first was actually written by a guy named Dr. Ray Noonan, who completed his PhD in 1998 out of New York University. And he had basically done an analysis of a combination of the space life sciences against the sexual sciences, and sort of done a combination to try and provide some sort of comprehensive look. Did a great job at it for what was available at the time. I think his dissertation is over 300 pages long, so it's definitely quite a read. But obviously, in my own research, came across that and tried to build upon sort of what Dr. Noonan had done for establishing a foundation for the field.
So this all begs the question. We all know about sex and sexuality. How do you define sexual sciences? That probably would clarify a lot for people as we move into this conversation.
So, to give a basic background of sexology, it's still a very young science, comparative to a lot of fields. It was founded in pretty much the mid 1800s by a dermatologist named Yvonne Bloch in Germany. And obviously, as a dermatologist, his focus was a little bit more in the realm of venereal diseases and things like that. It would later expand, to include psychology, and it started off pretty Victorian, sort of in its standards. Some of the base documents in this field were very much the opposite of our understanding of sexuality as a science now, as an area of study. And then it grew in the following decades. You had the founding of the Kinsey Institute in the 1950s in the United States. That was obviously a very big step when it came to American sexology. It is right now, again, the only sex research institute specifically dedicated to study of sex in the U.S. at the moment. You also had the Institute for Advanced Study of Human Sexuality, which is where I gained my degrees from. But they closed their doors in 2018. So right now, Kinsey is basically it. Yvonne Bloch, when he founded the field, he referred to the study of sex as the general science of mankind, because it sort of touches in every area, of science that you can think of. It's not just medicine, biology, but it also dips into the social sciences, chemistry, even physics to a degree. So there are many different facets of all the different disciplines that can be applied throughout the field, and there's a broad spectrum that you can study in when it comes to this area.
So you give me a great history, and you've kind of given me the upper level of it, but I'm guessing somebody listening might still be like, "But what's it about?"
Uh, so, so when it comes to what has been referred to as space sexology or astrosexology, as shown from the title of my institution, uh, it is an application of the sexual sciences to specifically to off-Earth environments, which is every environment other than Earth. But we base our knowledge on what we do already know, because in order to know where you're going, you have to know where you've been coming from. Uh, the science itself is rooted in biology because of the reproduction aspects. Obviously, we're going to focus on that in the early years. The ultimate goal of this field is to be able to enable humanity to spread out among the stars, to settle new celestial bodies such as the moon and Mars and anywhere else that we eventually choose to go. Uh, Having evolved, all the way from a single cell organism to the complex sentient organisms that we are today, all of that has occurred on the surface of this planet in a one Earth G gravity well. So there are certain variables that have always been fixed, and as we venture into space environments, those variables suddenly and very radically change. So obviously, there's a lot of impacts on our biology, our general physiology, not just reproductive factors, but they become much more severe when you apply them to growing infants and children and fetuses in the womb, as opposed to already matured adult astronauts. So that is the core of focus right now. But when we start talking about long-term space missions, you're also going to have to consider sexual impacts on psychology of the crew, on crew dynamics, things like jealousy, relationships that could impact how the crew interacts with each other. And if things go wrong or bad in any way, could ultimately impact the overall mission and potentially even mission success. So these are areas that do need to be studied and do need to be addressed.
So, in a broad sense, correct me if I'm wrong, then sexology, and in this case, astrosexology, is the study of breeding genders, because we have a spectrum of genders and only a few of them right now. Probably going to get into some politically correct trouble here, but only a few of them are able to breed in space, and the interactions between them, both prior to, during, and as a result of those sexual interactions. In other words, the sociological, psychological, courting, whatever you want to call it, interactions of those kinds of people in a space environment, what actually happens during the act of sex in space, and what happens when sperm and egg come together, and can they, and how does that happen in a non Earth environment? And then finally, the output of that interaction in terms of the viability of a fetus or baby that is produced as a result of those interactions. Would that be a fair summary?
I would say so. From the reproductive aspect, you mentioned genders. When it comes to reproduction, I mean, gametogenesis. You need a male gamete and a female gamete. They need to be able to the male gamete needs to be able to find the female gamete and bind to create a fertilized zygote, and then that zygote needs to be able to travel through the female's reproductive system an implant in the uterine wall, develop as an embryo, grow as a fetus, and this is all prenatal, and there's also postnatal considerations when it comes to things like birth, taking care of a baby in the immediate term after the birth, and growth in those weeks that follow. Not just weeks, but months. As we're all well aware, people tend to use the old euphemism of kids grow like weeds. So you have very very rapid rates of cell division in infants and toddlers, children. So there are a lot of considerations for the impacts of microgravity and radiation on those growing little humans. So given that we know the impacts of radiation and microgravity are pretty detrimental in fully grown adults, there's a lot more that we need to learn before we can ethically bring babies and children into space or try and uh, have babies in those environments.
Perfect. So we're going to wrap up this section, having kind of cleared the field out as to what it is, or laid out the field, what it is we're going to be talking about here. And I know there's a couple of people sitting out there, but like going, hey, what about test tubes? One step at a time, sort of. And but I think a lot of this is going to apply in either case. So we're going to be right back in a minute. You are listening to iRock Space Radio. This is the Space Revolution. Our guest today is Dr. Alexander Layendecker, and we are talking about sex in space. All right, spacers, welcome back to the Space Revolution. I'm Rick Tomlinson, your host. You're listening to iRock Space Radio. We're part of the iHeartRadio network, and our guest today is Dr. Alexander Layendecker, and we are talking about sex in space, or probably more correctly, all of those things that surround sex, from human interactions to can reproduction occur beyond the Earth, to the growth of early a baby. So, Alex, first of all, too, I think I should have mentioned early on that you're a part of a group called Spaceborne. Can you tell us briefly what Spaceborne is looking into? Because that'll help drive us into the next section here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been in my role an advisor to Spaceborne for roughly the last 5 years. So Spaceborne United, which is a Netherlands-based startup, they are a biotech startup that focuses on IVF technologies as applied to space, or as they call it, ARTIS, assisted reproductive technology in space. So they are seeking to fill in a lot of the data gaps when it comes to reproductive biology, using sort of your traditional, microfluidic disc experiment, sending mice embryos. Initially, it'll be mice embryos up into space environments and testing the different phases of reproduction. So I believe if we are on track, first test launch should be this coming year. So that'll be, there will not be an experiment, an actual experiment on board that rocket, but a dummy capsule that we place in the rocket just to test the feasibility there. And then I believe the follow-on, we're looking at potentially 2025 for the first actual mission going up, Artist 1.
So that to me always begs the question, and I get asked it now and then. It's like, well, we've been going to space since 1969. Nobody's looked at this in any depth. We're just now starting to talk about mice embryos. I have my opinions on this. What are yours as to why it's taken so long?
So yeah, excellent question. And to expand a little bit on the information you already gave, so there have been experiments around reproduction that have been sponsored by National Space Agency, so Roscosmos. Back under the Soviet Union, they actually put up the first biosat that studied rodent rodent mating and reproduction in 1979. It was Cosmos 1129 was the mission. They put up another one in the 80s in the, I believe it was the Cosmos 1500 series. NASA themselves have also put up rodent experiments. In the mid 90s, a series of experiments went up that were co-sponsored by the National Institutes of Health and studied live rat pups and mice, which the results of those were concerning. The detrimental effects that we saw on the pups, and especially fatality rates when it came to things like postnatal periods. With regard to why
Hang on,
it
I'm going
has
to
not
stop
been,
you. I'm going to stop
yeah.
you because you just like dropped that one. You said they were concerning. What was
Oh,
concerning about them?
I mean, I can get into that if you would like.
Just a little bit, and then we can move on.
Yeah, absolutely. So the uh, the missions that the rodent 1, 2, and 3 went up on were shuttle missions, and I want to say it was 1994, 96, and 1997. Uh, those missions brought groups of rat pups into orbit, and or pregnant rat mothers, and a example of statistic I like to go back to often when I do presentations on this topic to express the concerns and the dangers here is that you had 3 separate rat pup groups, and the mortality rate in the youngest group for the period that they were brought into space, mortality rate among the 5-day-old pups was 90%. So 90% of them died. Among 8-day-old pups, it was 10%. So there's a very significant 3-day gap there in terms of healthy development. And the 14-day-old pups all did survive in that particular experiment. However, all the pups that did survive in comparison to the controls were significantly underweight. Even the 14-day-olds, I think, had neurovestibular issues. They were 25%, had 25% less mass, the weight that they carried when they were growing. So a lot of concerns, came out just from that small handful of missions. There was another that was put up. I believe that mission series was continuing. There was another that was put up, but unfortunately, it was on Space Shuttle Columbia, and
Hmm.
those mice perished. When the shuttle broke up in the atmosphere. And to my knowledge, that was the last NASA experiment that had to do, at least in recent years. So NASA sponsored experiment that had to do with reproduction. Although there have been some co-sponsored experiments done with the Japanese Space Agency, studying gametes, sperm, and things of that nature. Um, with regard
Mm-hmm.
to why and not a lot of research has been done in this area, I think from a cultural perspective, sex has always been a very taboo subject at NASA, and that is a fallout effect from the fact that NASA took its roots from pretty conservative elements of military test pilots and engineers back in the 60s when we were fighting the quote unquote godless communists of the Soviet Union. So there has always been, until recent years, there had always been a pretty conservative nature of NASA. It's I've said this before, and plenty of other people in the field have said this. It's a organization of by and for engineers that engineers vehicles. That is their prerogative. They are engineering the vehicles to get us into space, and the science, the space life science, sort of piggybacks on the rest of it. We do enough space life science to try and keep the astronauts healthy, but a lot of the methods that we have used thus far are sort of a band-aid as opposed to tackling the the real issues. And space life sciences budgets have been shrinking at NASA over the last decades. Reproduction and sex in general has tended to always get NASA folks in trouble whenever it has been brought up. And we have to remember that NASA answers to Congress, and Congress has certain elements within it that are firebrand levels of conservatism that take the view that all sex is dirty and evil, and they have kind of a short-sighted take on everything, especially in this area, not realizing that if we want to be able to settle Mars, settle the moon, and expand out into the rest of the cosmos, this is something that we're going to have to figure out. Because if you can't have babies in your new settlements safely, successfully, the old-fashioned way, because the old-fashioned way is still going to be happening, then a settlement is kind of a moot point. You die out after one generation, considering if it is an Earth independent settlement.
So there's so much in what you just said. Oh my God.
Sorry,
We
I
have
tend to go
like so many
all
different
over the
shows.
place sometimes.
Yeah, there's so much to talk about. So regarding the conservatives and this, of course, the conservatives would be the ones who would be often accused of being the most imperialistic and colonial, who would want to expand the domain of
Which is
humanity.
ironic
Therefore,
when you think about
yeah,
it.
it is ironic. So they're shooting themselves in the whatever. That's one part. The NASA right stuff thing, totally get it. Something you and I had talked about with some of your compatriots at Spaceborne was also the fact that it isn't in NASA's mandate to worry about settlement. Their whole thing has been camping trips,
Right.
and still is, no matter what their PR is, no matter what the stuff in the fancy videos and animations is all about. Um, their whole job is to go out there and come back. There is no multi-year, you're going there to live there and build a family agenda within NASA. So that's out of their purview until it's put in by those same very same Congress people that we're talking about. Going all the way back to the beginning of your question, it was interesting to me that you were talking about these different ages of rat pups that were sent up, and they were sent up at those ages. And I'm curious that, and this is, we won't get way down in the weeds on this, that maybe the very young ones didn't know how to find their way in zero G to where they need to feed on their mother's breasts, and the older ones maybe already knew that, and that's this is a layman. I am the poster child of layman, but it's those kinds of things that we have to. What I'm trying to get at is every one of these experiments, as science does, indicates a bunch of new questions, each of which has to be peeled away, or what scientists call variables have to be peeled away with controls for those variables so that we can get to why it was the young ones didn't make it, why it was they had physiological challenges when they come back at different ages. And we don't know any of that because there's been so little research. Is that correct?
Yeah, I would say that's a fair assessment. To quote one of the lead researchers in this area, she was a NASA researcher, had been quoted as saying, "We know nothing." So we know just enough to know that there are a lot of issues that we are going to be running into. I think we know enough to recognize that as of right now, without mitigation procedures in place, we cannot reproduce in space, not safely. Right now, it presents a danger, not only to the life of, the baby, but also potentially the life of the mother. And that is, that's a concern that some colleagues of mine and I expressed in the recent paper that we were discussing with you in that sidebar that you were just talking about.
Okay.
There are massive data gaps. Those data gaps have to be filled, and building out the experiments and doing mission design for getting those data gaps filled, that is what ASRI and Spaceborne are about right now.
Great. We're going to come back in a minute and we're going to talk about that because we have a bunch of people, myself included, and other people offering rides and stuff like that who are saying, let's go. Right. So we're going to come right back. All right, Spacers, you are listening to the Space Revolution. My name is Rick Tumlinson. Our guest is Alexander Layendecker. We're talking about sex and reproduction in space. And you're listening to iRock Space Radio, part of the iHeartRadio network. We'll be right back. Hey there, Spacers. Welcome back to the Space Revolution. My name is Rick Tumlinson. You are listening to iRock Space Radio, part of the iHeartRadio network. We're talking to Alexander Layendecker, a space sexologist and very somber mind in terms of looking at this topic. The bottom line that we're dealing with right now is, as you've heard me say on this show, publicly and in writings and things like that, is we are maybe 5 years, 3 to 5 years, let's say, as far as development cycles go, to being at the point where civilians, non-government employees are going to be heading out into space for extremely long-term stays, if not, let's say by 2030, heading out to try and settle places like Mars or live for a long time on places like the moon. In the meantime, there are going to be people going up to orbiting space facilities. And yes, whether they're co-workers or they're going up there to go on a visit, to have fun, to hang out, to be the T word, as I say, the tourist word. Oh, God, I can't believe I said that. They're going to be doing some stuff in zero G that involves Velcro, rubber bands, and padded rooms. And this is the serious side of that. So, Alex, what you are saying is, from a dry scientific perspective, we don't know what's going to happen. And it doesn't look good.
Certainly not on the physiological side, the bioreproductive issues, which we've already discussed a little bit. There are inherent dangers that come along with any sort of copulation opportunity, of which there will be a lot in the future of commercial space. As you mentioned, you mentioned the dirty T word. There is a inflection point that we are approaching where the visitors going up into space are no longer just going to be professional agency and private, commercial company private astronauts. You're now going to be able to have average everyday people that fall within a reasonable price range where you can purchase a ticket and you can go and take a suborbital flight for a day or two, stay at a space hotel. In the early years, it'll be quite an expensive endeavor, but still within reach of people making six figures, which puts it within reach of tens of millions of people on the planet. So I think we'll definitely have a ready population that is prepared to go into space and willing to accept the risks of going into space. And as comes along with that, people of different motivations are going to be going for different reasons. So folks not going for professional reasons or simply because they have dreamt and trained their whole lives to go into space. Now people are going to be going for vacations, and one of the number one things that people do on vacations, one of the number one things that people do in hotels, is kick back, relax. A lot of sex happens in those places, and it would be foolish to assume that it's not going to happen in space hotels or general space environments. So that considered, we now have a surging probability for incidences of copulation that could result in reproduction, could result in fertilization, and as we discussed, create a dangerous situation, especially depending on how long people are on these space vacations for. So if it's anything longer than 2 weeks, then you're potentially looking at very dangerous potential for ectopic pregnancies. If a fertilized zygote does implants in the fallopian tubes as opposed to the uterine wall because it was not able to uh, navigate correctly in microgravity. There's a lot of unknowns that currently exist that we don't want to take a risk on, but those risks are rapidly approaching.
They really are. And on the sexual side, I have to admit, um, I've been thinking about this a long time. That's why I did the preface to I think it's Laura Woodmansey's book,
Yeah, I
Sex
think
and
that
Space,
was
a long time ago.
2005, right?
Which,
It's published.
pardon,
I think that was 2005. It was published, so
something
it's been
like
out for a
that.
while.
And I'm holding up my hand. I'm admitting it. I bought cosmosutra.com and cosmosutra.com.
I've never even
Um,
thought of that as a thing, but that
well, it was one of the ultimate adult coffee table books, and I thought, let's figure out all the positions for all of these things. But we're really more focused on the results of that party, than the actual party itself here today. And we may come back and um, bring your associate Shauna and Dr.
yep.
Shauna Pandya and have some fun with the entire other part of the topic. But I think we're in a serious vein here. But you're right, and what you just said. The ectopic. Having this is a problem that happens on the Earth,
Yep.
right? Um, that post. I'll let you explain it again, but boom, right there, man, just blew my head. Right, that's an obvious, easy to anticipate possibility, right? That the fertilized egg doesn't find its way down to where it needs to go. Down, I said, down, right? So,
Any
yeah,
direction of space, right?
right. But I mean, yeah, but I mean, that's how it goes, right? I mean, we don't know. I guess we can presume that gravity is a part of how that happens. I'll let you take it.
So, from what we have been able to tell, yes, gravity is important to all the stages of reproduction. How important, we're still trying to determine. ASRI is currently developing a scale for how much gravity are you really going to need to safely and successfully complete each stage of reproduction, all the way from gametogenesis down to delivery. Because when it comes to the second and third trimester, there I would say is enough evidence to suggest that gravity does play a significant role in in how the fetus develops, and also how the baby is going to be positioned for delivery. Gravity does play a role in that. There were other rat experiments that determined the uterine muscles of the mother had actually grown significantly weaker after exposure to microgravity, which made her contractions a lot weaker. Because, as you know, we lose muscle mass in microgravity. Her and there were numerous subjects here, but saying her just to give one example. Uh, Weaker uterine contractions, which led to a much more difficult delivery of the pups, and also part of contractions, part of the effects of contractions during the process of birth and delivery is that the pressure helps deliver sort of a shock to the baby's physiological systems and get them working on their own. So baby is able to start breathing on their own, and separate from the uterus. One of the reasons why, if a baby comes out and is not breathing, you see the doctor give baby a slap on the back. So it delivers sort of a shock to the system, and then baby starts crying and breathing, which is exactly what we're going for. So simply the fact that issues like that exist, you can see that the systems of the mother, as the baby is relying on them, are affected, and then the baby systems themselves. So when you want to think about things like neurovestibular development, cytoskeletal development, how the cells are stacking, forming, how the skeleton is forming, how muscle mass is forming, and the organs, uh, ocular systems with the eyes. There's a whole host of issues that, again, we already see defects and negative impacts with adult astronauts. If you want to take those same effects, a 20% potential bone mass loss or muscle mass loss, and compound that over time on with a growing fetus or a growing infant, think about trying to, this is a greatly oversimplified comparison, but imagine trying to build a house on mud and the bricks just keep falling over, but you just keep piling bricks on top. You're not going to have a strong foundation. You're not going to have a well-built house at the end. Again, gross oversimplification, but that's kind of one of the ways that I see it in the back of my mind. So yeah, gravity and the levels of gravity, or as has been described by other folks in this field and by one of my mentors, are Dr. Jim Logan, who you know well. Gravity prescription is something that we're going to have to determine. What level of gravity gives us an ethically and medically acceptable growth model for human babies off world? Is Mars gravity high enough to successfully raise children? Because if it's not, then we've potentially lost the surface of Mars. At least we lost the surface of Mars as a long-term settlement location. And not only that, we lost the moon. So we can't raise children on that surface or the surface of the moon. And we would have to default to some kind of O'Neillian structure, perhaps in orbit around the planet, where children would have to grow to full maturity, grow until you are done growing as a adult. So for males, I think the age is around 23 years old before you can go down to the surface and work. So there's engineering solutions that can help us sidestep some of these issues, by creating artificial gravity or simulating artificial gravity, and then obviously shielding for radiation. We do know that Earth environments work. We have all the data of humanity's entire existence that to fall back on there. So Earth environments are our green line, and how far away from that line can we get before the lines start to turn amber and then red? Is kind of how we're approaching the topic.
So you are, in a way, alerting us right now and our friends who are looking. What is it? We have 5 private space facilities that have funding over $100 million, which kind of makes them real, right? They may fall up. They may not, happen for other business reasons, but that's a lot of money. These are not sketches or something. These are real companies that are trying to build these space facilities. They should be all over you guys right now. They should be begging you, funding you with millions of dollars to find these things out. Because we're talking about, and what you're saying infers that the very first times that human beings go up to these facilities and conceive and stay for any length of time and then come back down to the earth, that the babies they have could be, I'm not sure the perfect term, malformed or
Rick, you there? I may have lost you for a second.
Yeah, malformed or have birth defects, major, what we would call birth defects. And therein lies society saying no and shutting the entire thing down, or lawsuits that shut the entire thing down, or just pure morality that says we can't do this and we stop. There is no data out there because our space agencies have been lax at doing this. It wasn't their mandate. We've had the conservative mindset. All of these things have led to a moment where we're about to have the capability and we don't know a damn thing about the results of what it is we are about to do. This is scary stuff, really, right? I mean, we started out the show with this, hey, sex and space kind of thing. What we've done here is we've walked into a place of alarm where our entrepreneurs, our space agencies need to hear this alert and engage now in supporting the kind of research so that we know these things. Dr. O'Neill, as you know, my old boss, said that he believed rotating space facilities that provided one gravity using the spin were the place for human beings to be. Um, and it's funny because anybody who's ever watched The Expanse, how do you torture a belter who's grown up in zero G?
Yeah.
You know, you make them stand up on the Earth, right? Um, so we may end up with these species, Homo marsialis, Homo spacialis, Homo lunaris, that are completely different species who will never, ever be able to come back. But we don't even know that because the development of organs, all the other stuff inside of them may not happen correctly. So we're going to come back in a minute. Um, and now that we're thoroughly depressed,
I'll
and
try to cheer you back up on the other side.
see if we can cheer things back up. Right, exactly. All right, spacers, thanks for listening to the Space Revolution. We're going to take a break. My name is Rick Tumlinson. This is iRock Space Radio, part of the iHeartRadio network. We will be right back. Hey there, spacers. Welcome back to the Space Revolution. My name is Rick Tumlinson. Our guest is Dr. Alexander Layendecker. We started out talking about sex in space, then we got into reproduction, and I'm depressed. I am. As I was telling you during the break, Alex, this is one of those things you think about, and you think, oh, it's going to be okay. It's not going to be okay. It is not going to be okay. Our billionaire friends, our space facility friends, none of them, NASA, ESA, none of them are funding research into this area, and it is going to blow up in our faces. Am I right?
I would make a caveat to what you just said, as far as none of them are funding or researching it. There is research that has been done, is being done. It is not happening at nearly the rate it needs to, in order to garner us enough data so that we have the facts we need before we are presented with actual dangerous situations. Um, so, as we were discussing earlier, quote unquote space tourists or space adventures, whatever you would like to call them, private astronauts, uh, are going to have very very different motivations for why they go into space. For the first time, folks are going to be going up for leisure purposes. So they're going to have time to themselves. They're going to have staterooms on space yachts and other things like that. So you can expect that, yes, sexual activity is absolutely going to happen, and it's going to happen soon, probably within, I think you give the window of the next 5 years. I think Starship is probably going to be fully operational within the next 3 years or so, if not sooner. And I think that I'd read somewhere that once Starship becomes fully operational, we're within a year or two of launch costs falling below $100 a kilogram, which puts space in reach of tens of millions of people, for a
Mm-hmm.
fiscally reasonable price. So you can expect that, yes, we're going to have the masses flood into space. It will be true mass access to space for the first time.
Yeah.
So again, that event horizon is rapidly approaching. and we still don't know nearly as much as we need to, nor are we on a track to know as much as we need to by the time that happens.
And we are in the age of likes and TikTok and all of these. Look how cool I am, that's cooler than someone else. So, you absolutely know that within the first whatever period of time, somebody's going to go up there to have sex immediately. And
So
go
I
ahead.
will not reveal I won't reveal names of companies or anything, but I know for a fact that commercial space companies have been approached by individuals offering to, buy out entire craft solely for the purpose of being able to, have a romantic engagement. Um, so if people are willing to do that and spend obscene dollars for buying out an entire spacecraft, uh, yeah, you can tell it's very much at the forefront of a lot of people's minds, and people that are going to be wanting to go into space as part of the first wave of everyday average people going. They're going to be looking to break certain barriers and break records. You always have that
Absolutely.
crowd as a part of any group when it comes to any kind of adventurism. There are people that are going to specifically go into space for that reason. So yes, it's going to happen. Humans are humans, and we're not going to be able to really stop them, especially if they have private
Well, and
quarters.
I want to differentiate going up to space to have sex. Fine. But within that set is going to be the first couple, the first whatever, who want to conceive in space and get
Yes,
that, they want that Guinness Book of World Records marker.
and those are the folks that right now I and my colleagues are most concerned about, because yes, folks are going to be aiming to be the first ones to ever conceive a baby in space. In fact, when Spaceborne started off about 6 years ago, they were flooded with offers of people because they had come out and said, "Hey, we want to have the first baby in space by 2024." Very lofty goal, and we had a number of conversations about the dangers and things, and so they have obviously pushed their timelines. But this was, in their original press announcement, they had mentioned 2024. Uh, with with that being only a year from now, so that was roughly 7 years from the time. I didn't think that it was very feasible for being able to gain all the data that we would need to go through it, analyze it, go through multiple animal trials, and eventually be ready to birth a baby in space. And by all indicators, it wasn't. It was not a safe endeavor anyway.
Yeah, so
But
we just don't have the data, man. It's not that, I mean, I never thought I would be in the position of saying that you should ban something like this. But it's almost as if we should ban it until we know, not the sex part,
yeah.
but the reproduction part.
So yeah, it would absolutely. History has proven us a thousand times that trying to ban sex and humans from engaging in it is a fool's errand. You can ask a lot of churches about that. Uh, we don't. My colleagues and I, something that we very much wanted to stress, and we stressed it in a call, the other day that we were on with you. We're not looking to ban sexual interaction in space. I'm very against banning of sex, but there
Absolutely.
are,
Yeah, me too.
these inherent dangers that people need to be aware about when it comes to reproduction. The fact that you participate in this act could lead to a medical danger, and potentially a danger that even threatens the lives of the rest of the crew, resources, things of that nature. When it comes to cislunar space and the cislunar economy, at least you are still within reachable distance. If you're on your way to Mars, that certainly is going to impact the entire mission, because you can't turn the ship around, and and I know we're getting more into kind of in thinking more into the future, settlement and things like that with this example, but when you're on your way to Mars, you won't be able to turn around at that point if you discover that a woman has become pregnant, and now you're faced with the dilemma of are we able to, is she going to wish to carry it to term? Is she going to have to proceed with a medical abortion for her own safety? Uh, so many unanswered questions that again we need to get the answers to, so that we can make the most ethical decisions possible in those very, very trying circumstances. Um, with short-term space visitors, you are looking at things like informed consent. The best that we can do, as with all space travel, when private astronauts go into space, they have to sign a whole bunch of waivers regarding safety. And hey, you are strapping yourself to you know, a rocket, uh, loaded with explosive material, and this is an inherently dangerous endeavor that you're taking part in. Because lots of things can go wrong, obviously, in space, and the environments of space are also very hazardous. People are briefed on the health, the health impact aspect of it. We simply need to add reproductive impacts into that brief and into those waivers. People need to understand what they could potentially be getting into, be aware of the dangers, and be able to provide informed consent before they engage in any kind of activity. Where the ethical dilemma comes in is that, and I feel that we may see a lot of back and forth on this topic, as we've seen with, for example, abortion rights in the United States, is that a baby that is conceived in outer space cannot give informed consent. But if there are any detrimental impacts to their physiology, they're the ones that have to grow up with that. Um, so there's a lot of discussion on, from a medical basis, from a philosophical basis, ethics, all of it, that needs to still be had, and the conversation needs to be expanded and continued, so that we start, as I said, getting these answers and being able to have a mature conversation about it.
Yeah, and look, I want to be very, very clear. Separating the act of sex, not a problem. Don't care. Go wild. Velcro yourself to the wall. I don't care. Bounce off the walls. It's all, have a great time. But if you are engaging in a sexual act in microgravity that could result in an issue with your child, you're gambling with a child's life.
Yes.
That is a major issue. And if nothing else, I mean, the legal profession, and as you and I know, lawyers are making so much money off the different parts of these questions in space. And they're going to, I never thought that, space would be paced by the legal profession, but it is happening.
Yeah.
You could get sued out of an existence as the operator of one of these facilities, let's say, by the fact that, and the PR that turns against you, and all of this because you have created a child who may have issues based on the fact that you wanted to be the first to conceive in space. It's a very, very heavy, very, very serious topic. Alex, I'm gonna, and we're gonna stop there for this part of the topic.
Okay.
And there's so much, man. I love, and the way I do the show is that it's a conversation. I'm learning with you. I may know some stuff about the topics I bring on here, but you're opening my mind. I'm sure you've blown a couple of minds of people who are listening. Hopefully, some of the right people in some of these facility development companies are going to look at it. And there's just so much to be discussed here. I mean, do we put a moratorium on it?
Yeah.
You know, are you able to fly in space only if you can't conceive for the first 5 years? What do you think
Yeah.
about that?
I mean, I would not seek to restrict anybody from being able to fly in space if they are healthy enough and able to do it. Uh, because I wouldn't want
Mhm.
that to happen to me. I know that I'm able to, would be able to, as one half of a couple, conceive a child. So I wouldn't want that preventing me from going into space. And as far as a moratorium goes, I think a moratorium would be a good idea in terms of no deliberate attempts at reproduction. And also, there's still yet a lot to be learned about birth control. Hey, the efficacy of birth control in microgravity environments. So, female astronauts have used birth control in the past to suppress their menstrual periods while they're on missions. How effective will birth control be in preventing, fertilization of a zygote and development of, the beginning of development of a fetus? Uh, these are still questions that we do not have the answers to. But again, that's just another area that needs data. So studies need to be run, experiments need to be conducted. That would be probably later term experiment, because at that point you are working with humans, um, and you already need to know sort of what your safe channels are uh, in the event that birth control fails and you do happen to conceive a child.
Yeah, so we may, and it doesn't exist yet, there may need to be some sort of, like, for example, if there was a space station association, let's say, right, and they could come together and self regulate this concept, right, and say that we, the owners of these facilities, are going to, you're going to sign a waiver, you're going to sign an agreement that you are taking the appropriate, you know, uh, you know, whatever to make sure that no pregnancies occur on your
Yeah.
visit to space until we know more. Um, my fear, Alex, is that our field, this is populated by um, libertarian thinkers, by people who are just going for it, by competitive businesses, um, by people who I think in their heart mean well, but there are times. I mean, look, I'm the guy who's been yelling, "Let's go, 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 go" for so long,
Yeah.
and yet there are times when you just need to slow down just a minute and go, what are we looking at here? And I think that the service that ASRI, Astrosexological Research Institute, and Spaceborne, and that you yourself are doing, Alex, is maybe one of the most important areas of research, um, areas of alarm, and areas of careful study and recommendation, that we have right now as we are about to open the frontier. And I just want to say thank you for coming on today. I had some non-serious fun questions to get into, but you've hit my serious button today. And it's
I'm
like,
happy to answer those too. I
yeah, no, I
don't
got
want
you.
to leave you on a
And
depressed note, but
I know, but we only have a limited amount of time for the show. We will have you back. Like I said, I think we will get you and Sean back, and we'll have a fun talk about the other part of it. You know,
yeah,
um,
mechanics are a bit more fun there.
yeah, how you have fun, how you cause these problems.
Yeah.
Um, and because that is the an extremely interesting area. But yeah, I just you've taken me into a very, very serious place here. And I think that this is something that anybody who's listening, who's involved at all with any of these facilities, or an investor in them, or a regulator, or the founder of these companies, need to pay attention to this now. Because if you don't, it is at not just your peril, but the peril of some unborn child out there. And we have to take care of these things ourselves, or society takes care of them for us. So I want to thank you for spotlighting this area and bringing us into this zone. I love to end on a higher end note, but and I will ask you one question. You've taken quite a different course to get here, going through the military training, etc. What do you say to some person out there of around the world of any skill set or whatever, as to if they want to engage in not the sex part, okay, that too, but if they wanted to get into this field, if they wanted to, because again, I think the demonstration you're doing right now, by the way, is that it isn't all about engineering. It isn't all about building rockets. I mean, that's one thing you are screaming out loud by just your very existence and the plan and the work you're doing. So, what is it you tell somebody out there who's not an engineer who wants to engage in our field to help open the frontier?
I would say so, and to attack on to what you're saying with regard to engineers. Engineers will also have a place in helping solve these problems in terms of mitigation techniques, habitat design, things of that nature. If you are somebody that is interested in researching sex and reproduction in space, give us a call. Our website is asri.space, and also Spaceborne United has a lot of literature out there. We are actively seeking to engage with the community and solve this problem. So I am onboarding research fellows. So if you have especially if you have a background in biology, psychology, social work, things of that nature, those things will apply as we move forward in a comprehensive effort to study human sexuality writ large in space. So not just the reproductive aspects, but all the aspects, because I've said this before, probably even on a couple other podcasts. I subscribe to the belief that your sexuality is one of the few things that runs through your mind, your body, and your soul. So it is a big part of what makes you as a person. And we will be taking it with us wherever we go in the universe. So we have the opportunity to do it right. We've screwed it up a lot on Earth. We have the opportunity to do it right as we go forward into these environments. So it's important, not just for the seeding the future of humanity in a literal sense out in the cosmos, but for the story that we're going to bring with us out into the stars.
All right. Well, usually I wrap up things, but I think you just said it yourself, sir. So, Alex, thank you very much. All right, spacers, you've heard it here. We are out the airlock.